My brother sneered, "You'll come crawling back." But years later, when I handed him and my parents a lease agreement to live in the house they disowned me from, all they could do was sign. If you've ever been told you're not good enough, this story is for you. Subscribe, like, and stay with me as I take you through the climb from humiliation to poetic justice. The room smelled of polished mahogany and aged wine. A chandelier sparkled above the grand table like a crown over a silent execution. I sat at the end, my posture upright, my hands clenched on the linen napkin across my lap. The weight of a dynasty pressed down on my shoulders. My father, Reginald Vance, wore his signature pinstripe suit even for a family dinner. My mother Celeste sipped her vintage rose like it was holy water. And my brother Jackson, heir apparent to the Vance real estate throne, was halfway through mocking me. "You're seriously going to throw away everything for paint cans and power tools?" Jackson set his fork down with a thud. "What, are you going to flip one little house and declare war on the family empire?" I didn't flinch. "I'm not asking for your blessing. I'm telling you I've already started." Father exhaled slowly. His stare pierced through me like an X-ray. "You were born into an empire that took 3 generations to build, Eleanor. You think you're above that? I think I deserve to build something of my own." Celeste didn't even look at me. She swirled her glass, observing the ruby liquid, not her daughter's defiance. Reginald's voice dropped to a chilling murmur. "You will come crawling back. And when you do, the door won't open." The words echoed in my mind like a curse. I knew this was the moment he cut me off. Not just financially, emotionally. The empire was everything to him. Obedience was currency in our family. And I had just declared bankruptcy. "I'll never crawl, Father," I said, standing up. The chair scraped the marble floor like a scream. "I'd rather fall on my face than live under a ceiling built from your expectations." Jackson chuckled. "You'll fall all right. Let's see how many nails it takes before she begs to come home." I left the dining room with my pulse pounding in my ears. The mansion's echo mocked each step. I walked past portraits of our ancestors, men who built skyscrapers and crushed markets, faces I no longer owed anything to. Upstairs, my room was untouched. Cream-colored walls, luxury bedding, and trophies from boarding school all sat frozen in time. But none of it felt like mine. I packed in silence, not pausing when Jackson leaned on my doorway. "You're really doing this," he said, arms folded. "I am. You'll be back in 6 months. Broke. Humiliated. Then I'll still be free." He snorted. "You're not special, Eleanor. You're just stubborn." I zipped the suitcase. "Sometimes, that's enough." He walked away without another word. I drove off that night with nothing but a battered Hyundai, $4,200 in savings, and a silent scream lodged in my throat. No trust fund. No fallback. Just a growing fire inside me. The motel was off the interstate, the kind with flickering signs and stale coffee. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the beige walls, numb. Then I opened my laptop and scrolled through real estate listings. Cracked tiles. Moldy ceilings. Boarded windows. They were all waiting for someone foolish enough to believe in them. I clicked on one, a rotting colonial on the edge of Charleston. Listed for less than a Mercedes. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't even livable. But it was a start. I picked up the phone and dialed. "Yeah," said a groggy voice. "I want to see the house on Millstone Drive. Tomorrow at noon." A beat of silence. "Fine." When I hung up, I stared at my reflection in the motel mirror. The girl in the glass didn't look like a mogul's daughter. She looked scared. Tired. Alone. But her jaw was set. I wasn't chasing revenge. I was chasing freedom. And if I had to claw my way there with splinters in my palms, so be it. The next morning, I stood in front of the house on Millstone Drive, clutching a coffee I couldn't afford and pretending I wasn't terrified. The sky was the color of old cement, and the air was thick with humidity that clung to my skin. The house looked even worse in daylight, wooden siding warped by decades of rain, windows like blind eyes, and a porch that sagged like a tired sigh. The real estate agent barely looked up from his phone. "You're Eleanor." I nodded. He scanned me, head to toe, clearly not impressed. "Investor." "Soon," I said. He gave me a look like he'd heard that before. "Watch your step." Inside, the place smelled like mildew and rot. Floorboards groaned. Wallpaper peeled like sunburned skin. I moved slowly, running my hand along the dusty banister, my stomach twisting. I wasn't just walking through a house. I was walking through my future. "This place needs everything," the agent muttered. "Good," I replied. He raised an eyebrow. "You sure? It's a money pit." "No. It's potential." I wasn't lying. Beneath the grime and decay, I saw the skeleton of something that could stand proud again. I saw rooms that could hold warmth, windows that could frame a sunrise, and a front door that would never slam shut on someone chasing a dream. I signed the paperwork that afternoon. Every cent I had, $1.37 after fees, went into that wreck. The agent handed me the keys with a shrug, as if he were passing along a curse. I drove back with the windows down and the wind in my hair. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt raw. Unprotected. But I also felt alive. That night, I slept on the floor of my new house, curled up in a sleeping bag between exposed wires and old paint cans. I didn't cry. I just stared at the ceiling and whispered into the dark, "Don't let me fail." At sunrise, I started. Scraping wallpaper. Pulling nails. Watching hours of DIY tutorials. My hands blistered. My back screamed. The first time I cut into drywall, I bled. The first time I painted a wall, I cried. I lived off peanut butter and gas station granola bars. I showered at the YMCA. I sold an old necklace just to buy a second-hand ladder. Every setback felt like a test. The leaking pipe. The collapsing ceiling. The raccoons in the attic. But I kept going. I didn't call anyone. No updates on social media. No pleas for help. My family thought I was gone, and for now, I needed that silence. One evening, covered in paint and dust, I sat on the porch and watched the sunset pour gold over the cracked driveway. For the first time, the house didn't look like a disaster. It looked like a beginning. Then came my first offer. A local landlord, older man in worn boots, walked through the property with folded arms and a calculating gaze. "You do this yourself?" he asked. "Every inch." He nodded, then handed me a card. "It's rough around the edges, but it's got heart. I've got tenants lined up." "What are you asking?" I named a number. He gave me a slightly lower one. I didn't blink. "Deal." I walked away with $6,400. It wasn't much, not in the world I came from. But to me, it was everything. It was proof. Proof that sweat meant something. That effort had value. That I wasn't just playing house, I was building an empire. I used that money to buy my second property. Then a third. I reinvested everything. Ate cheap. Slept little. But I was moving forward. Contractors who once ignored me now returned my calls. Bankers who once dismissed me now asked for meetings. I learned to negotiate, to estimate rehab costs, to see a property's soul beneath its scars. And through it all, I kept hearing Reginald's voice. "You'll never survive without us." He was wrong. I wasn't surviving. I was rising. And they had no idea what was coming. 2 years passed like a fever dream, blistered hands, late-night paperwork, and a calendar filled with overlapping renovation timelines. I didn't celebrate birthdays or take vacations. I counted success in foundation pours and closing costs. My phone was filled with photos, not of people, but of floor plans, permits, and before and after shots of places I'd revived from ruin. I lived out of a rented studio above a bakery, where the smell of fresh bread reminded me of the comfort I couldn't afford. Every dollar went back into my work. I didn't buy clothes, jewelry, or new furniture. The only luxury I allowed myself was a black leather notebook, thin, sleek, expensive for someone like me. It became my Bible. Every flip, every lesson, every number went in there. And slowly, something changed. I was no longer a woman trying to survive on scraps of defiance. I was a builder. A strategist. A force. My properties began turning heads. I focused on neglected neighborhoods, areas written off by developers chasing luxury builds. I turned cracked sidewalks into clean patios, broken windows into glowing storefronts. I didn't slap on quick cosmetic fixes. I fixed the bones. And the people noticed. Then came my first $1 million sale. A dilapidated triplex near the University District. It had been a gang hideout when I bought it. Bullet holes in the siding, syringes in the yard. My friends, what little I had left, told me I was insane. I gutted it. Rebuilt every unit. Hired local artists to paint murals. Held a small open house with music and cookies. Every unit was rented within a week. A private buyer offered me $1.2 million. Clean. No negotiation. When I walked out of that closing office with a check in my hand, I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I went to a quiet cafe, ordered a plain tea, and opened my notebook. At the top of the next page, I wrote, "This is not revenge. This is resurrection." I established an LLC. Hired my first assistant. Then another. I built a team, not of corporate suits, but of underdogs like me. A former roofer with arthritis who trained younger guys. A single mom who could spot code violations with a glance. A teen dropout who became my smartest floor plan analyst. We didn't wear badges. We didn't go viral. We just worked. And under a name no one recognized, **EV Ventures**, I quietly bought and transformed nearly a dozen streets across Charleston. Not luxury condos, but livable, dignified homes. I didn't need anyone to know it was me. In fact, I preferred it that way. Until one day, I received a message that shattered the silence I'd built around myself. An old family friend, someone from my father's inner circle, reached out through a burner email. "He's drowning. The Vance empire is cracking. You might want to look at the market." I didn't respond. I just opened my listings and scanned the page. There it was. The Vance mansion. The same estate I'd walked away from with shaking legs and blistered pride. For sale. No fanfare. No announcement. Just a quiet, desperate listing, like an injured lion finally brought to its knees. I stared at the screen for a long time. The marble columns. The wrought iron gates. The room where my father had promised I'd come crawling back. I leaned back in my chair, heart steady. This wasn't a trap. This was an invitation. And I wasn't the same girl they had cut off. I was the storm they never saw coming. The listing didn't stay up long. I made sure of that. I didn't approach as Eleanor Vance. That name would have sent red flags straight to my father's broker. Instead, EV Ventures placed the bid, silent, clean, backed by a capital trail so deliberately opaque even my brother Jackson wouldn't have traced it. They were desperate. That much was obvious. The asking price was already slashed, and the photos showed neglect creeping in like rot behind wallpaper. No staff. No landscaping. The iron gate slightly rusted. The marble staircase with grime at the edges. They had held on too long. The house that once symbolized untouchable wealth was now just inventory. A liability. A bleeding asset that no longer impressed investors. My offer came in 10% under market value. It was accepted in 48 hours. The wire cleared. The title transferred. Just like that, the mansion that once banished me was mine. No press release. No victory lap. I walked through the front doors as the legal owner 3 weeks later. I expected to feel rage. Triumph. Vindication. Instead, I felt stillness. The foyer was empty, echoing with ghosts that used to tower over me. The grand chandelier no longer sparkled. The air smelled sterile. The soul of the house had died when its masters lost control. I wandered room to room. The dining table where I had been exiled. The staircase where I stood with a suitcase in hand. The piano room where my mother used to sip wine and hum old jazz. All still here. All irrelevant. The silence was my crown now. I left the house untouched for weeks. Not a light bulb changed. Not a drape moved. Just let it sit, like a mirror reflecting back the hollowness of their former kingdom. Then came the call. Jackson. His voice was tentative. Ellie. I almost didn't answer. But I did. Not for him, for the moment. Eleanor, I corrected him. What do you want? A pause. Mom and Dad, they're not doing well. The market collapse hit harder than we expected. The estate, it's gone. They have nowhere to go. I said nothing. They asked about the mansion, he added. I didn't know what to tell them. I leaned back, letting the silence stretch long and slow. You can tell them to meet me at the front door. I'll decide then. That evening, I pulled up the driveway in a black SUV. No chauffeur. No entourage. Just me and the keys they said I'd never hold. Jackson stood outside, pacing nervously. He looked thinner. Paler. No tailored suit, just a wrinkled shirt and unshaved jawline. The golden boy had rusted. I really appreciate this, he said quickly as I stepped out. I'm not doing this for you. The door creaked open before he could respond. Reginald Vance stood there, jaw tight, eyes hollowed. His once immaculate suit was faded at the seams. Celeste clutched her handbag like it was her last possession. They didn't look defeated. They looked afraid. I assume you know who owns this house now, I said flatly. Neither answered. So I continued. You may stay. But not as owners. As tenants. Under contract. Reginald's jaw twitched. You're serious. As death, I replied. The lease will be standard. Market rent. Utilities not included. And no favors. You can't be. I cut him off. Silence swallowed the moment. Then slowly, stiffly, Reginald nodded. I handed him the folder with the lease documents. When he reached out to take it, I didn't let go immediately. Our eyes locked. Welcome to my property, I said. Payments due on the 1st. His fingers clenched the folder like a lifeline. Behind him, my mother lowered her head. Not in shame. In acknowledgement. I turned and walked away without another word. They had disowned me to protect their power. Now they lived under mine. The lease was standard. I'd written hundreds of them before. But this one felt like scripture. Monthly rent, $8,500. Due on the 1st. Late fee, $300 after the 3rd day. Security deposit, 1 month in advance. Utilities, separate. Maintenance, tenant responsibility, unless structural. I sent it through my legal team, with no notes, no exemptions. The kind of contract my father used to draft for people he thought beneath him. Now, it bore his name in the tenant section. When the lease came back signed, I stared at their signatures. Reginald A. Vance. Celeste W. Vance. Neat. Cursive. Desperate. They had signed away their pride for a roof. My roof. I didn't gloat. I archived the file like any other. Then I scheduled the auto-pay link, notified my property manager, and stepped back. It was never about cruelty. It was about boundaries. They would live here, yes, but on my terms. On the 1st of the month, the payment came in, on time, no excuses. No contact. They didn't thank me. And I didn't expect them to. Weeks passed. The estate I once tiptoed through now stood quiet. No catered dinners. No chauffeurs. No guests in fur coats and Rolexes laughing on balconies. The garden was overgrown. The fountain had stopped running. The mansion, once a palace, now wore the dullness of an ordinary house. One day, I visited for an inspection. No notice. Just a pop-in. The door opened slower than I remembered. My father stood there in sweatpants, Reginald Vance, the man who once controlled half of Charleston's skyline, wearing elastic waistband pants and house slippers. I stepped inside. The air was different. Less perfume. More dust. Everything functional. I asked, voice even. He nodded once. Plumbing slow upstairs. I'll send someone. My mother emerged from the sitting room, wrapped in a robe that looked 10 years older than her usual silk collection. She didn't say anything, but her eyes lingered. Searching. Maybe for approval. Maybe for mercy. I offered neither. Just professionalism. You're up for renewal in 11 months, I said. You'll receive a notice 90 days prior. If anything changes, let me know. My father's lips pressed together. I could see it in his eyes, the urge to say something sharp. But he swallowed it. Like he'd swallowed 100 little losses since the day he lost this house. As I turned to leave, my mother spoke. Eleanor. I paused. You've built something, she said quietly. We didn't think. She trailed off. I didn't need her to finish. They didn't think I would survive. Let alone thrive. I know, I said. You made that very clear. Outside, I stood on the same stone steps where I once cried as a teenager, told I wasn't enough. Where I had promised myself I would never beg. And I hadn't. They did. But the strangest part. I didn't feel powerful. I felt free. That night, I returned to my own apartment, not as luxurious, but mine. Every inch of it earned. I poured myself a glass of wine, opened my notebook, and wrote one line. Power is not ownership. It's knowing you don't need revenge to win. But still, I smiled as I thought of the lease calendar. Each first of the month, a quiet reminder. Of who they used to be. And who I had become. Winter came early that year. The city felt quieter, subdued under the weight of gray skies and wind-whipped trees. I had 3 projects under renovation, a new office opening on Broad Street, and 2 investor calls a day. But in the back of my mind, something kept tugging, like a faint string tied to the house on Carrowell Hill. The mansion. Their prison. My property. It had been nearly 6 months since they signed the lease, and something about their silence unsettled me, not in fear, but in curiosity. There had been no missed payments, no complaints. Just quiet compliance. So I drove out one afternoon, unannounced again. No clipboard. No assistant. Just me. The house looked tired. Not broken, just lived in. The hedges hadn't been trimmed in a while. One of the porch lights flickered. A sliver of the brass door knocker had tarnished. Small things that once would have sent my mother into a panic. I knocked. The door opened to reveal Celeste, her hair pulled into a loose bun, no makeup, sweater sleeves pushed up. She blinked. Eleanor. Her voice had lost its usual polish. Less performance, more reality. I expected her to step aside with hesitation, but instead, she said, "Do you want tea?" That stopped me. Tea. Inside, the living room had changed. No more sterile perfection. Books stacked sideways on the table. A throw blanket on the couch. Framed photos of places they'd once traveled. Not a fortress anymore. A home. She moved slowly, pouring hot water over 2 mugs. Your father's out. Jackson, too. Visiting some old contacts. Trying to revive whatever's left. I nodded, taking the mug she offered. You didn't have to invite me in. You didn't have to offer the house. She sat across from me. For a moment, we didn't speak. The silence was different now. Not heavy. Not hostile. Just human. You were always the difficult one, she said, looking out the window. The one who asked too many questions. Broke the rules. Challenged your father. Is that what made me disposable? She looked at me then, truly looked. No, she said. That's what made you terrifying. I didn't know what to say to that. She continued, her voice soft. We built our world on control. On making sure everything stayed in its place. You weren't meant to have your own place. Then I took one anyway, I said quietly. A smile ghosted on her lips. Yes. You did. The front door opened. Reginald's voice echoed down the hall. Celeste. Did you pay the? He froze when he saw me. The old sharpness flashed across his eyes, but it faded almost instantly. He looked older. His skin hung looser on his frame. His coat was dusted with dried leaves. I wasn't aware we were entertaining, he said dryly. I wasn't aware you still held court, I answered. He said nothing. Just walked into the study and shut the door. Celeste exhaled. He'll never say it. But he knows. Knows what? That he lost. I set my tea down and stood. I didn't come to gloat, I said. I came to see if the roof's still holding. It is, she replied. But the walls are quieter now. As I walked out, I paused in the doorway. I'll send a contractor to fix the flickering porch light. Celeste gave a small nod. Thank you. Outside, the wind whipped harder, but I felt warm. Not from the tea. Not from pride. But from something simpler. I had walked back into that house not as a daughter hoping to be seen, but as a woman who no longer needed permission to exist. The mansion had once mirrored everything I wasn't allowed to be. Now, it reflected who I had become. And for the first time, I didn't see cracks in myself. I saw them in the mirror they used to hold over me. The first sign of collapse came in whispers. A foreclosure in Manhattan. A failed merger in Atlanta. Then an expose, anonymous sources claiming that Reginald Vance had leveraged shell companies to prop up his failing commercial real estate division. The empire he once ruled was bleeding. And it was public now. Every headline was a fracture in his legacy. Vance Properties faces lawsuit over breach of contract. Insiders reveal mismanaged funds under Reginald Vance. The fall of a tycoon. I watched from a distance. No press statements. No glee. Just observation. Because I knew what he'd never admit, it wasn't one bad deal that brought him down. It was pride. The same pride that banished me. The same pride that refused to adapt when the world changed. I didn't reach out. I didn't interfere. I simply kept building, quietly acquiring the very blocks he used to dominate. Properties he once walked through in tailored suits were now appraised by teams under my banner. Then, one morning, Jackson called. Not the calculated Jackson who once smirked across dinner tables. This time, his voice was strained. Raw. They're losing everything, he said. The accounts are frozen. Legal fees are endless. I think he might have to sell the last building. The one on Vance Plaza. I said nothing. He won't say it, but he's breaking, Eleanor. Mom too. Still, I stayed silent. And then, softly, he asked, why haven't you crushed us? I leaned back in my chair, watching the early sunlight spill across my polished desk. Because I don't need to, I said. The weight of your choices is doing it for me. He exhaled. I never thought you'd make it. None of us did. I know. A pause. Do you hate us? The question hung in the air. And for the first time, I realized, I didn't. I didn't hate them. I had outgrown them. You were a storm in my life, Jackson, I said. But now, I've learned how to build in the rain. When the last Vance Plaza building went up for sale, I didn't bid. Let someone else take it. That wasn't my battleground anymore. My revenge wasn't on auction. My victory had already been signed, 11 months ago, on a lease agreement with their names on it. That was enough. But life has a way of writing perfect scenes when you least expect it. One afternoon, I visited the mansion, not to inspect, not to judge, just to check on the electrical work. Routine. The living room was quiet. The sun filtered in gently through the curtains. My father sat by the window, staring outside at a garden that once bloomed underpaid perfection. He didn't flinch when I entered. I used to think the empire would outlive me, he said softly. That it would be my legacy. And now? I asked. He looked up. His eyes weren't cold anymore. Just, human. Now I realize my legacy is what I tried to destroy. He didn't apologize. He didn't need to. Because for Reginald Vance, those words were as close to confession as he'd ever come. Celeste came in with tea, offered it with a hesitant hand. No performance. No grandeur. Just the ritual of someone trying to remember how to live simply. And for a moment, we sat there. 3 people. Not titans. Not tenants. Just family. Or what was left of it. I left before dusk. Outside, the wind had calmed. The sky stretched wide, open, full of quiet space. The empire had fallen. But I had risen. And I was still building. The first of the month came like a ritual. An alert pinged on my phone, clean, consistent, automatic. Rent received. Property, 9 Carrowell Hill. Tenant, Reginald and Celeste Vance. It had been a year now. 12 payments. 12 reminders that the roles had reversed and stayed that way. I never missed them. I didn't hover or meddle. I ran my business like I always had, structured, professional, detached. The mansion was just another line on my spreadsheet. But it was the only one that carried a shadow when I scrolled past it. It wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about what the money meant. I remember the day my father used to speak of rent collectors with disdain. People who live off tenants, he once said. They've never built anything real. Now he was one. Each time the bank notified me of the successful transfer, I didn't celebrate. I didn't smirk. I just felt still. Until one month, there was no ping. No alert. Just silence. At first, I assumed it was a glitch. The bank sometimes lagged. But by the third day, it became protocol. Late. I waited. No call. No apology. No excuse. On the fourth day, I drove to the property. The garden was quiet. Too quiet. No sounds from inside. I knocked once. Then twice. Finally, the door opened, slow, deliberate. It was my mother. She looked pale. Smaller somehow. There was a delay, she said softly, not waiting for me to speak. The account, it was frozen. Legal issue. It'll be cleared this week. I nodded once. I understand. But I didn't step away. Something made me stay. Behind her, the house looked even more worn. Not in disrepair, but tired, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. Would you like to come in? She asked. It wasn't an obligation this time. It was an offering. I stepped inside. The dining room, the place where I was cut off all those years ago, was empty. No elaborate table setting. No waitstaff or chandeliers dimmed to perfection. Just natural light and a few books stacked on the corner. My father sat in the study. No computer. No spreadsheets. Just a newspaper folded neatly and a glass of water beside him. He looked up as I entered, and I saw the same eyes that once dismissed me. But this time, they didn't hold fire. They held weight. I assume you're here about the rent, he said. No, I replied. I'm here because I noticed the silence. He nodded slowly, as if trying to figure out whether to be offended or relieved. Then, he said it. We didn't think you'd last. I know. You did more than last. You built. I did. A pause. I suppose you don't need us to say anything, he added. No. But I watched him anyway. Watched the man who once spoke in commands now wrestle with restraint. And I realized something, the greatest revenge wasn't power. It was perspective. I saw them now for who they were, not giants, not villains. Just flawed people trapped in a life they built out of fear. I left them that evening with no threats, no reminders. Just a simple message as I stood at the door. If you need more time next month, let me know. As your landlord. Not your daughter. My mother blinked. And my father, for once, said nothing. Outside, as I stood beneath the same balcony where I once swore I'd never crawl back, I felt no pain. No bitterness. No victory dance. Just peace. Because the first of the month wasn't just a deadline anymore. It was proof that I had become the kind of woman they never expected. And the kind they could no longer afford to deny. Spring arrived with soft light and the scent of blooming wisteria. The The kind of season that makes you believe life can start over, even if it's already well underway. I didn't visit the mansion often anymore. There was no need. The rent came on time. The house stood quietly. My company had expanded into 4 states, with over 200 properties under management. EV Ventures had become a name people whispered in boardrooms, disruptive, sharp, impossible to trace back to anyone. Exactly how I liked it. But one Saturday morning, something pulled me back. Not out of obligation. Curiosity, maybe. Closure. I parked at the bottom of the hill and walked up. Slowly. No rush. The breeze rustled through the trees lining the driveway. The iron gate, once polished by a dozen hands, now stood with a few specks of rust, beautiful, in its own strange honesty. When I reached the front door, I didn't knock. I just stood there. It wasn't the same door I had once closed behind me in shame. It wasn't the same house. And I wasn't the same woman. The door opened. Not my mother. Not a butler. My father. He looked surprised, but not startled. Almost expectant. "Eleanor," he said. I nodded. I was in the area. A pause. Then he stepped aside. No questions. Inside, the house was quieter than I remembered. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was peaceful. The kind of stillness that comes after years of noise finally settled down. "I didn't think you'd come back," he said. Neither did I. We walked into the kitchen. There was a kettle on. Simple. Human. He poured tea into 2 cups. No ceremony. No pretense. Just motion. "You know," he began, "I used to think strength came from control. From being the loudest voice in the room. From being right." He handed me a cup. I was wrong. That admission, from Reginald Vance, landed like thunder. I didn't reply right away. I let it breathe. He sat across from me, hands wrapped around his cup. For the first time in my life, he looked tired. Not defeated. Just real. "Watching you build all this," he said, "without our help, it made me see things I never wanted to." "Like what?" "That we raised you to fear failure, when we should have taught you how to face it." That stung. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. I stared into the steam rising from my cup, wondering how many daughters had sat in kitchens like this, trying to reconcile ambition with love, silence with survival. "I didn't come here for apologies," I said finally. "I know. I came to see if I still cared." "And?" he asked, voice steady. "I do," I said. "Just, not in the same way." He nodded. There was no protest in his eyes. No defiance. Just acceptance. We sat there for a long time. Not as landlord and tenant. Not as daughter and father. Just as 2 people who had seen each other's worst, and somehow made it out the other side. When I stood to leave, he didn't follow me to the door. He simply said, "Thank you, for not turning away when you had every right to." At the threshold, I paused. The same marble step I once tripped over with tears in my eyes now felt like solid ground. I turned. "You once told me I'd come crawling back." He inhaled. Held it. "But I didn't," I added. "I came back standing." Then I walked away. The door clicked shut behind me. But it didn't sound like rejection this time. It sounded like release. I stood on the rooftop of my newest development, watching the city pulse beneath me. What once felt towering and unreachable now looked manageable. Knowable. Almost small. My phone buzzed. Another property acquired. Another deal signed. Another brick laid in the empire I never planned to build, but built anyway. Not for vengeance, but because I refused to disappear. I had spent years defining myself by what they denied me. By the door that shut in my face. By the voices that told me I was a disappointment, a phase, a failure in waiting. But that was no longer true. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was leading. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. The mansion still stood at Carrowell Hill. It had become just another property in my portfolio. Still occupied. Still quiet. Rent paid. But its weight over me had long since dissolved. The girl who walked away that night with a suitcase and a wound. She was gone. What remained was a woman forged by demolition and drywall, by small victories and sleepless nights, by choosing herself even when it meant losing everything else. I had no desire to punish them anymore. That was the most surprising part. Because I'd already won. I won the moment I walked into a bank and was addressed as CEO, not Miss Vance. I won the moment I hired a staff that believed in a vision no one else saw. I won every time I handed over a set of keys to a tenant who never thought they'd have a real home. But most of all, I won because I never lost myself to prove my worth. That was the trap they fell into, believing that power was about being worshipped, feared, obeyed. They ruled through silence. I built through sound. The sound of hammers in motion. The sound of doors opening where there used to be walls. The sound of a woman's footsteps echoing in places she was told she didn't belong. One day, I visited the first house I flipped. It had been years. The paint had faded slightly. The shutters were a little crooked. But it was still standing, stronger than before. I ran my hand along the porch rail, remembering the girl with shaking hands and a bank account scraping zero. She wouldn't believe the life I lived now. But she'd recognize the spine. She'd recognize the grit. I sat on the porch steps for a while, sipping cheap coffee, watching the world pass without needing to chase it. I didn't need validation anymore. Not from family. Not from headlines. Not even from myself. Because the life I built was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving that I could be right, without permission. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, casting everything in warm gold, I smiled. Not because I had made them crawl. But because I had chosen to rise. And stayed there.